Welcome to Beyond Pipeline. We talk about how top performers win the inner game of sales. My name is John Abouche, and I'm your host. And today we have a very special guest. He is the founder of the GOAT SDR community. He was a very successful SDR at NetSuite, and now is an enterprise BDR at Brex. Without further ado, Sam Lopez. Sam, looking fresh today, my man. Seriously, how are you?
Thank you, bud. Thank you, bud. Thanks for that introduction. I'm doing great. How are you today, John?
Dude, stoked. As we were talking about, I'm really grateful to be on here and just be able to kind of just casually talk about what makes people tick and what makes them successful in the sales world. We'll cover your outbound tactics, we'll cover your GOAT SDR community. But where I want to start is I want to go back in time and better understand how you got into sales
Yeah.
and just kind of go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, John, thanks for giving me the honor of getting on here,
Thank you
man,
for
and
coming on, bro.
getting these hard questions you're gonna throw at me. So kind of how I landed in sales, to be honest, I kind of always knew I wanted to get into sales. Um, for context, so my dad, in Colombia, he has his own like business. In Colombia specifically, like the denim market, like jeans are huge, huge,
No.
huge. And so he started off selling like door-to-door denim to like local businesses and eventually was able to like scale and have his own business there. So to me, I'm like he mastered sales and this is kind of what led him on his entrepreneurial journey. And so I kind of see the same, I've always seen the same trajectory for myself. And so I'm like, okay, in order to become like, let's say an owner of my own business one day, I really got to know how to sell myself, sell my product, etc. And so I need to get really good at sales. So that's kind of where that comes from one side. I think the other side is sales is a role that tests you constantly, right? And
Yes.
what I mean by that is you're only gonna eat what you kill, right? That old saying. And so that's your discipline, your work ethic really goes is really tested daily. And to me, like that's why I wanted to join sales because I wanted to be tested daily. Like Sam, you say you're a hard worker. Well, let's see it. Like, let's see it.
Mhm.
Because if you're really not, like, you'll reflect in your number really quickly. So those are really like the two things that really drew me on into sales, like from an early age even.
Yeah, it sounds like your dad really inspired you, especially with the door-to-door sales of denim. Good for
Yeah.
him, man. It's tactical. And you kind of knew you always wanted to be in sales, which I totally share with you. Actually, I share that sentiment. And yeah, like there's something about being nitty-gritty and wanting to be tested. So I share all that with you. Let's go a little bit into then like how you actually got your first job as an SDR. I know a lot of people maybe, especially right now in the context, either people are looking for the first job, they're unemployed, trying to get a new job.
Yeah.
And I know you've had a number of videos out on this, so I'd love to understand your philosophy. We can go from there.
Dude, well, it was hard. It was definitely a grind, I'll tell you that. So I graduated maybe a year and a half ago,
Okay.
end of 2022. And like I said, I knew I wanted to get into sales, but it took me a while to kind of figure out the type of roles that entry level sales looks like. I want to say about a month into just like what kind of sales roles I should be applying to, I realized it's like, okay, SDR, BDR roles, right? And so I kind of compiled a list of anywhere between like 100 to like 200 companies that were like hiring for SDRs. And then I kind of like shrunk it down then into like the specific cities that I wanted to move into. So
Mhm.
as you know, John, I'm based in Austin, so I'm like
Woo.
just shrunk down the list to like SDR roles or companies in Austin that were hiring for SDR roles. And then I kind of really just tried to tap into that to my network, right? So I went to Florida State, which has a huge network, I would say, across the country, but also like a lot of like pride, university pride. So people are always like
Lots
willing
of
to
pride.
help.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I was just really what I kind of did and I kind of did it without realizing was like prospecting into these companies, right? So like
Yes.
who are these FSU alumni that are now at these companies who can maybe give me some insight into the role or who can maybe give me insight into like how I can even get into an interview, right? And so like that's kind of slowly how I broke my way into kind of NetSuite, which was my first job, was by reaching out to FSU alumni who were SDRs at NetSuite or
Mhm.
who were even AEs now that went through the SDR role. And they kind of just guided me through like who were the recruiters that I should reach out to,
Exactly.
who what the interview process was gonna look like. And so like those were kind of what helped me really break into tech sales.
Yeah, it sounds like you kind of leverage the pride of the FSU
Oh,
alumni
for
really
sure,
well.
for
Yeah,
sure.
that's like that. That's a rocket ship right there. Um, can you walk us through more tactically though for people listening of like because I've done this before too and it
Uh-huh.
actually makes a world of difference. There's some people stuck trying to find jobs and get jobs and
Right.
they don't realize how to actually do it well. Can you walk through really tactically like how do you know who do you reach out to? How do you reach out to them? What's the value for that person? What are you trying to extract from them? Can you really get nitty gritty for people really quick?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll kind of like take a step back and like putting together that list of companies that I wanted to work at, right?
Mhm.
And so I really just did simple Google searches like top 50 SDR roles, right? And then I kind of like filtered that through like cities I mentioned. And then let's say I found like 20 different companies that were based in Austin that were hiring for SDR roles. And so at that point, like I'm just opening up each company's LinkedIn page and go into like their people's tab. And then you
Mhm.
can, at that point, you can then filter on like a lot of different things, right? So whether it be like university or people based in Austin, or maybe back then I was living in Miami. And
Okay.
so I was filtering by people based in Miami that work at that company. And then this is kind of like where you get tactical and like the people you're reaching out to and like how you're reaching out to them. And so for FSU, it was really easy when it comes to value. Like there's only so much value you can offer as a student or a
Mhm.
recent grad who's trying to really just break into um a company, right? For a role. And so I was just like very casual, right? And more so like trying to just ask questions and be naturally curious. So if for example, like you're someone at NetSuite who was an SDR, like I would reach out to you and I'd be like, hey John, glad we can connect on LinkedIn, reaching out to FSU alumni who've gone through this
Yeah.
SDR role. Like, what's your experience? What was your experience like when you were in that role, and like what were things that set you up for success? So like keeping it like just curious about the role itself, and then just natural conversation. I actually always love to end like my first initial message is like, hey, regardless if you answer or not, go Knowles. And I think that
Yeah.
was my favorite piece because I think regardless, they would always just
You made him
respond
laugh.
back, like,
Yeah,
yeah,
you made him
exactly,
laugh,
go
dude. You
Knowles,
gotta make him
go
laugh.
Knowles.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like my messaging specifically when it came to like tell me about this role.
Yeah, and I'm again, I'm getting really tactical here, as I think this is a really important distinction. Is you go, okay, what are the companies I want to work for, and you have a clear. We can, take 10 minutes to talk about that. We won't, but
Sure.
defining the right company to work for, and then you go,
Yeah,
okay, once I know that, let's go, let's look at the people and go, who do I like? Who's in the role I used to be in or want to be in? What can I learn from them about the role? Let's reach out. Let's be human. The way you can provide value, candidly, is one, getting the opportunity to help someone, which people want
yeah,
to do usually, and two, you can make them laugh in an appropriate way.
for
Um,
sure.
and then honestly, you learn. And then, how did you use those connections to then get your first role at NetSuite? Because I think again, it's such a hidden. No, it's not even hidden. It's said all the time. Most people don't do it. Like, how that help you to get your first role at NetSuite, which is a great company.
Yeah, so initially, they're kind of just the the value that they really helped me with, or the value that they really provided me, was really just like interview best practices. So for
Yeah,
even additional context, like before I got that interview at NetSuite, I had interviewed at probably tens of places, have gone through multiple final rounds, and I just was not getting an offer.
yeah,
And so pretty much every interviewer at that point, like I was just going like all in, like like what information can I get to get a job offer? I had a month left of school, and I'm like, dude, like I need a job
get
offer
something.
before
Yeah.
I graduate. So it was really like grind time for that. And so my questions were like, hey, what can I expect? I was hopping on calls with people. They're like offering me their time, honestly, like just like for free, right? Like there was very little value that I could provide, but they're just people are so willing to help if you're willing to just ask for help, which I think is people forget about. And so they're just really offering me like best practices and what to expect on those interviews. So then by the time that I did get to the interview, like I kind of already knew the questions that were getting gonna get thrown
Hmm.
at me. And I was like overly prepared really um for those interviews.
Yeah. And I think that over preparation is like it is something that is undervalued, especially now. Everyone's like, what's a multitask and get all stuff done, use AI, all stuff, which is like all great. But like
Sure.
at the end of the day, it's something just about being prepared, which obviously it seems like it worked for you. So with that being said, though, okay, so now you're a SDR at NetSuite. You know, walk us through what that initial experience was like and kind of how you ramped up quickly within the role itself.
Yeah, so it was like a big change for me. I moved from Miami to Austin, really on my own, really knew very little people. So I was like all in, like I mentioned. Like I'm here. I gotta like make sure I'm like successful, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so when we first started training, like NetSuite, honestly, like great training program. It was like 2 weeks of like really intensive, like these are the systems we kind of have in place. This is the product. Um, and this is kind of like what sales look like or what cold calling looks like. And so I think from day one, I'm like, I'm gonna be the first person there. I show up, I show up and there's already like 20 people there, and I'm like, fuck, like I wasn't the first person there. So but I was like, okay, like head up, like let's keep going, like let's just stay with it. Next day, I'm showing up early again. There's some people there. I'm like, damn, some people beat me. And like over just the course of training, like, I think what happens is like people the first day motivation is always there. It's not the same level of motivation after week 2 or week 3 or even
Amen,
after
brother.
day 3.
Yeah.
And so like that's where I'm like, okay, like I'm just gonna make sure I stay consistent and like showing up and being curious during our actual training sessions and raising my hand. And if they're gonna ask for volunteers, like I'm gonna volunteer. And granted, like these are all things before I even make my first cold call, my first like email sent, before I even look into like that first prospect. I always came in with like I want to fail first. I want to be the most curious. I want to ask the most questions. I want to participate the most because I think like what happens is people don't want to do that, or maybe they do want to do it for like the first day, or the second day, or the third day, but very rarely does everybody want to do that every single day. Um, and so I try to do that the most during the training session. So by the time like it's go live time, I was very, I would say like warmed up already. Like I knew kind of like I just gotta try. I just gotta try a little bit.
Hmm.
But that I'll tell you what, like even doing all that, like did not make my first cold call easy. Oh
No,
yeah.
no, no.
I remember like so we finally went live, we're done with training, and my first my first day of calls, I'm like ripping 30 calls. And no, 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 hang up, hang up, hang up. I'm like, why am I doing this? I just went through 2 weeks of training just to get hung up 30 times. Like, this is stupid. I hate sales. Like, why am I even doing this? And for me, like that's been like a feeling that like or that moment that I felt that first day making cold calls is like something that I've kept so tight with me. Because after like that 30th or that 50th call, I'm like, this is stupid, right? And at that moment, I'm like, I gotta make that call. I gotta make this call because like this is exactly what I wanted to do like 3 months ago when I was looking for jobs. So like I better make this call. And of course, I make the call and it's this guy. He's like, you know what? Like that's really yeah. Let's get me on a call. Like I'm super interested. I'm like, I get up, yell, set a meeting. I just couldn't believe it. But the bigger lesson is like to me is like those moments where you really don't want to do stuff or where like you kind of hate what you're doing is like you gotta lean into it so much. And
Hmm.
what happens is like people lean in for the first day, the second day, but not for the long haul sometimes. Super long tangent there,
What
John.
a beautiful segue into some of the mental side of this.
Uh,
Let's dive in deeper though into more like being consistent, showing up consistent, really the consistent motivation and the willingness to be like, all right, I don't want to do this, I'm still going to.
yeah.
How do you get yourself to do that? So some people call it discipline, some people call it motivation. I don't really care what we call it, but I'm gonna call it the discipline to keep showing up. Like, how do you get yourself to continually show up on a daily basis, especially what's specifically the scenario of you don't want to call today or you don't want to make the emails today or whatever it is.
So I definitely, it's a great question, right?
That's why I'm here.
Um, I think I think I definitely don't call it motivation. I'll even tell you like I hate the word motivation
So do
sometimes.
I. So do I. No,
Um,
I don't want to talk about it. Yeah.
yeah, because you're only motivated for so
Hey,
long,
first
right?
day. Yep.
You're only motivated for so long, and like don't get me wrong, like a really strong like week that you're really motivated is awesome, but what's better is just like 2 weeks or 3 weeks of a moderate level of work, let's say, or even like a high level of work over a consistent period of time, right? And so that's kind of the way that I almost look at everything now, right? Is like if I'm feeling motivated, let's chill out. Let's just chill out. Let's make sure we're doing something that I can do consistently, that I can do like in a disciplined manner. Um, I still have my lazy days, but I think it's kind of like let's get out of it quick and return to like this disciplined mindset that we could get into. For
What's the
me,
difference though? What's the difference between a discipline mindset and a motivation mindset? I think it's important to, you know what I'm saying? You just defined two different things. You said if you're motivated, I should try to chill out and get back in a disciplined mindset. That's counterintuitive to what a lot of people probably do. What do you mean by that?
so I think discipline, like if you're someone who's disciplined, you're gonna get something done like rain or shine. My Wi-Fi could be out for 3 hours today, but I need to get my $50 in no matter what, or my $100 in no matter what. My Gmail might not be working. Well, I gotta figure out a way to send out these 50 emails no matter what, right?
Hmm.
And so like I try to do that besides job, like at my work, like
Yep.
anything else, right? So like what are other ways that I might be traveling, but I need to read these 5 pages of my book, or I need to get this workout in or these miles in, like we are just talking about, right?
Hmm.
Um, so that's like having a disciplined mindset. That's how I view it, right? Like we said we're gonna do something, so we got to do it. Where motivation mindset is like, oh, you know what? Tomorrow I want to run 10 miles, right? But then the 10
You
miles,
plan on it.
the
Yeah.
day comes around and like you're not motivated anymore, more likely than not. So
Yeah.
are you really gonna do it?
Yeah. So
What
how
what,
do
what
you
do you think?
build that discipline then to continue to show up day in, day out? And again, this could be applied to
Mhm.
applying to jobs. It could be applied to
Right.
cold calls. It could be applied to relationship, whatever it is. But how do you build the discipline of showing up when you do not want to?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like once again, John, like I think I'm still trying to figure that out. Like I don't show up every day.
Hmm.
But I try to show up at least most days.
Hmm.
Um, I think for me, like those days that I really don't want to, but I still show up, it's like having a really strong why.
Yeah.
Um, it's always comes down to that. And for me, honestly, it comes down to just like my family.
Hmm.
They're kind of like my biggest why. So for even additional context, like I'm first generation American, first generation like college grad, and so I'm standing on the shoulders of like a lot of people. A lot of
Hmm.
people have like made sacrifices for me, and so if I don't want to wake up one day and make calls, I'm like, dude, you're being lazy. Like, come on, think of like your family, of
Yeah, dude,
all
it's
the people who
real.
like helped you before, and so like to me that's what helps me like get up. Like if I can or if my parents can make their way to the States and sacrifice so much for me, like I can make $50 today. I can make $50 today.
Oh, that is such gold. It's the contrast, right? It's the contrast of like, okay, like I could be doing that, and then if they could do that, I could do this.
Exactly.
Dude, that's absolutely beautiful. Dude, I share that with you, by the way. I share that. I'm like, okay, like people have had harder things.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and it's also like something that because we're talking about it, something I found helpful that you could try out too. Because I'm just thinking about now, what do I think about like what happens if I like don't do like who do I become for like my family or for future
Right.
kids or wife or whatever? What type of person am I going to be if I do this? It's like, oh, maybe it's just one day. But like, is one day going to turn into two or three? And again, I'm not perfect either. I think what you said earlier about the consistency of like, I might not be like full tilt all the time, but I'm always driving consistently forward.
Yeah.
Very, very disciplined, right? Yeah, I think that's yeah, that's a really good thing that you said, just like being consistent and finding a group that's consistent for you. That'll carry you into what I think would be a definition of discipline. So that's awesome, dude. That being said, though, you're at NetSuite. What enabled you, what'd you do to become successful within the role? I was checking out some of your stats, they're pretty solid. Your record at NetSuite. Like, what enabled you to be successful, soup to nuts, from a tactical perspective in terms of outbound? I know you have yeah. Let's just start there, and I have some follow up questions. But
I think my success early on at NetSuite really just came from like let's fail fast. So I wasn't scared at all to like make calls or to like call bad accounts, let's say.
Mhm.
Um, where most people were being probably too um too they're thinking too much on like who to call and what
Yeah.
accounts to call, like what to say, where I was just like, I'm gonna figure it out. Like I'd rather fail on my face and like mess up on a call than like not make a call. And so I think I was failing a lot really early on. But I was making sure I was like learning from those failures. And
Hmm.
so when that objection came around the second time, I knew how to handle it. Or even when that, and if I didn't handle it the second time, the third or fourth I did, right? And so I think that's what helped me by quarter two, three, and four, like really just know how to operate at a high level. So really just at the beginning it was failing fast, right? I think the second piece to like operate at a high level as an SDR came from like just being naturally curious
Hmm.
about my product, about the people that I'm talking to, but more than anything, like leveraging the resources I had to kind of answer the questions that I had, right? The natural curiosity. So what happens is like sometimes we're scared to ask questions because we don't want to look dumb, I guess, or because we're embarrassed. And I fall into that sometimes, but you got to lean into those moments. So I'm the type of SDR that's like bombarding my AE with questions like, hey, somebody just said this, like what should I have said? I said this. Or like, hey, like what does this mean? Like I know we do this, but what does that actually mean? Or like why am I even calling, like to use like a real clear example, like why am I even calling somebody in accounts payable? Like what is their role? Or like why am I calling to like a procurement person? Like why do they care about our product? Um, so I think failing fast and then having that curiosity and leveraging the resources to answer the questions like really empowered me to, as I continued my role and like got really comfortable in the product and all these things, like I was just able to like become like a SDR expert at what we did so I could drive value very quickly.
I love the combo of action, like you take a quick action and then you're curious. How do you, obviously with action comes at some level, I mean, there are lessons, but it would be deemed failure. How do you deal with failure, whether it's now in a cold call or an email or not hitting quota? Like how do you deal with failure?
Yeah, so I think I have this conversation with like SDRs a lot, and I think the piece is like I think SDRs have to like completely change like their perspective on like what our role is, right? And what I mean by that is we see no's as a failure, right? I give John a cold call and John is like, "Hey Sam, I'm not interested in Brex." Like that's a win. That's not a failure. But most SDRs like see that as a failure. And so it's not dealing with failure, it's kind of changing our perspective on failure, right? It's a win because I can get John off my list. He does not care about Brex. He does not care about my product. He has no solution for us to solve. Let's call somebody else, right? And so I think that like if you're asking me like how do you deal with failure, I don't deal with failure. I change my perspective on failure, right? Like getting that no is a win, and I think that's like something that SDRs like really need to like hone in on, to be honest. That just fired me up, John.
Oh, I feel it. It was beautiful, by the way. That was a beautiful soundbite. And that one's going to the books, man. With that being said, so it sounds like what you do is you work to change your perspective on, okay, like, and it, by the way, even when if someone does say no and it hangs up on you and you reframe it like this, does it always feel good, or at certain times does it not feel good?
No, it absolutely, like, I'll tell you what, like it doesn't feel good, but it's kind of like where you have to realize like it should feel good, or you should be like happy about it. I think, like, don't get me wrong, like I love when people say no, but I rather them say yes, obviously, right? I rather them say,
Yeah,
yeah,
all right. So
I'm
yeah, yeah.
interested in that.
Let's do it, baby. Yeah.
Right. But the point is, like, that can't be an issue for you, right? And what happens is like we let ourselves get so down on those no's, where the reality is like, I'm so grateful for this no because I could get to move on from this prospect, right? And so it might not feel bad or it might not feel good, but that's kind of where we got to make like a cognizant, like a very like
Hmm.
conscious effort to like
Yeah,
change how we think about it.
really. And I think this goes back to the whole discipline conversation we had earlier, where it's just like, hey, you got to show up no matter how you
Yeah.
feel, and know why you want to show up, or know what happens if you don't show up to what you want to show up, right? What happens then? Uh, I Yeah, that's something that I think is gonna be really powerful for people. So you're at NetSuite, you kind of learn how to walk, you learn how to chew gum and walk at the same time, cold calling, emailing, things like that. What and you went to Brex after that. Okay. Walk us through the experience. Like, what caused you want to leave NetSuite? What was it like moving to another company like Brax, which is much more startup-esque? I mean, they're
Yeah.
mature and it's a great company, but it's much more of a startup-esque company. Like, can you walk us through what that journey was like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, to be honest, like I had been wanting to go to a startup-esque, like you mentioned, company, like right out of college. And so, kind of almost like full circle here, when I was making a list of companies, like Brex was on that list. I stayed connected with the recruiter. Like I just found the recruiter on LinkedIn, kind of through the same tactics we mentioned. And they weren't hiring at the time. And so I'm like, hey, cool, you're not hiring. Let's just stay connected. And if something ever aligns, like glad to like connect. And so ends up couple months post my tenure or during my tenure into NetSuite, Brex is hiring again. And like the recruiter kind of reached out to me. And I'm like, you know what, like let's do it. Like this is kind of the experience that I really wanted to start up. Is company. The reason I kind of liked it also specifically, like, so my major was in finance and
Mhm.
econ at Florida State. And so I always wanted to be kind of like in that fintech space.
Yeah.
Just because like I really believe like financial technology is gonna like continue to grow, obviously. So I wanted to be a part of that, and I think very much so. I think Brex is in the forefront. So kind of went through that process, and I made the jump. I also thought it was really cool being part of the enterprise team, which is really just growing at a high pace right now at Brex, and I thought I was gonna take a lot of ownership into building out processes and building out kind of like best practices for SDRs, especially like after having that NetSuite experience. So kind of like the space itself just really excited me, and the whole interview process kind of was very similar to like any other SDR interview process.
So it sounds like you went to a company that was more in line with your interests, that obviously had a good growth trajectory, a great product, right? Those are all things that are really important to consider when looking at a new company.
Yeah.
So I want to pull those out. Uh, and now you're there today. Let's talk a little bit about what makes you successful there today, especially as an enterprise, as BDR, SDR. That's a little bit of a different motion. Uh, but I think it's going to be probably more the motion of the future, just because of the average account values, and then how it's worth a BDR working an enterprise account from a customer acquisition standpoint. So talk to me a little bit more about, like, what do you do to get ready for your day? And I saw a video where you do have like three goals for the day and you walk through that. Like, can you help the BDR listening, if they're like, hey, how do I prep for my day, or how do I make sure I'm successful, especially at
Yeah.
the enterprise level? Like, how do you plan your day and make sure you're mentally ready to go?
Yeah. So sometimes like from I guess beginning to end, like I usually start my day off with a workout. To me, that's kind of
Love
like
it.
the best way to start. Mainly because I get to take pre-workout, and so again, it'll keep me caffeinated throughout the morning, the afternoon. But post workout, I'm like logging in. And the first thing I usually like to do, like you mentioned, is those three like non-negotiables that I'm setting for myself. For me, they're usually like activity-based goals is what I
Hmm.
call them. And they have nothing to do on like my attainment percentage or my SQLs that I have to meet or the opportunities.
Yep.
It's more so around like things that I can control. And so for me, like I think I say this with like I believe this the most out of anything I've probably said today, but like adding accounts is like my number one priority almost every single day. I think it's so important for us to, as SDRs, to have fresh accounts in our list daily. So that's always like my number one goal. Add 5 accounts. And then after that, it's maybe like build out specific type of like strategic reports, whether they be like close lost or maybe my AE is going on on-site in Boston. So build out a list of accounts in Boston, right? And then maybe another one is like, hey, let's like learn one piece about our product like really well today. And so it's like just different goals that are things that like I can control. And that'll pretty much just set the tone for the rest of my
Hmm.
day. Um, After that, I definitely like block out my day for specific task. So pretty much my first hour to hour and a half is like finding those 5 to 10 accounts. And then after that, I'm ripping down, sending out emails kind of throughout the day based on like what my calendar allows, obviously like per meetings, but my day definitely starts off with those three non-negotiables.
And you said something about the three non-negotiables that are within your control. What caused you to focus on that specifically versus being like, I want to set a meeting today? Like, what was the thought process around that?
Yeah, so kind of two things. When I was at NetSuite, one of like my mentors there, he always just honed in on like as SDRs, like control what you can control, control what you can control, what you can control. That was kind of his like words of wisdoms constantly. So kind of like gets you thinking what are those things? They're kind of like those three things that we just spoke about, like whether they be dials, whether they be accounts added, email sent, those are things like that. But another piece of it would also be like, what's gonna keep me like disciplined or what's gonna keep me, for lack of better words, motivated, right? And if I put on there like set one meeting today and I don't set a meeting, that's gonna destroy me mentally, right?
Yeah.
That's gonna like just gonna make me sad. I didn't hit that goal. And so I want to do things that I know I can accomplish because they are in my control. And that's kind of the thought process between setting those.
I want to highlight that it's making goals that are within your control so that you have little wins so that you can sustain. Again, we'll call it discipline. If
Got
you
it.
want to call it motivation, that's fine. Sustain motivation and discipline over a long period of time. Like that is a golden nugget right there, of wisdom that I think a lot of people do not exercise. And so I love the intentionality behind that. I think it's critically important to staying, if you're not feeling disciplined, not feeling motivated, uh, create goals that are achievable for each day and just chunk it down and then do those and you'll feel momentum, feel progress. I will layer in and say that because I do the same thing. It's very helpful. So it's a very good nugget right there. Along those lines, what are you doing today to book meetings? What does your strategy look like? I want to talk a little more about just like purely outbound strategy. Just I know people will be interested, as I know you've experienced too, and especially in the enterprise space. Like, what exactly are you doing? Let's say you're like, man, I need to get some meetings on the board this month. Like, exactly are you thinking about it, soup to nuts? I know you said you start with fresh accounts, which makes total sense. I totally agree. Will Falkenborg says the exact same thing, by the way. I talked to him about this. So it makes sense. But what
Go.
else are you doing from like a cold call perspective, emails, like how do you think about messaging? Let's really dive into that.
So from like an outbound perspective or even like from a list creating like to start off there, um I really have like only two things I track when looking at accounts on and trying to figure out should I reach out to them or not. It's like, do
Hmm.
they have a website and do they have like a use case for Brex, right? And typically the answer to the second question is yes. Like pretty much any company can use Brex. I would say all companies can, right? And the first one is like, do they have a website that allows me to like look for contacts, which is really like what I'm trying to get at there. Like, is there people who would look at Brex or do they have finance execs, right? Those are the main two things when I'm looking at accounts to like reach out to. And I try to keep it really simple because like I mentioned earlier, like what happens is like we try to complicate it. We try to look
Yeah,
like
I love the simplicity, dude. I was gonna say it's a very simple approach. It's a very simple approach.
and that's like I do that on purpose because I think anybody we as SDRs we got to reach out to everybody. Obviously like in a strategic way, but anybody we should be reaching out to everybody. And so from then on, like, okay, like yeah, it checks off those two boxes. Like, what does my list for this account look like, right? So, do they have a CFO? How many CFOs? Do they have a global CFO? Do they have VPs of finance? Do they have like my ICP essentially, right?
Hmm.
And so I'm building that list strategically. I'm not just calling anybody at these companies. I'm calling the people that are gonna care about my product
Hmm.
specifically, right? And then on top of that, I also kind of layer in just because I'm a dial heavy person, I prefer calling over sending out emails. Do they have a phone number for me to reach them out on Zoom info or whatever other product we might use or you might use? And then after that. I'm ready to go. I'm pretty much
Hmm.
ready to go. I do send out like I wouldn't say like hyper personalized emails. It's more like account personalization that I
Yep,
use.
yep, I got you.
Um, and so I see this account has global offices, or I see that prior notes show that this account is using this specific tech stack. And then I'll send the emails based on that. And they change kind of by persona. So if it's a CFO or a VP or a director,
Mhm.
but the emails are relatively the same. Um, but I'll totally honest, like most of my wins come on the phone.
Yeah, totally. I want to pull out those some really good things there. You keep your process simple. You are intentional about the accounts you hit. You go, okay, is there a real use case that's going to provide this business real like and it rises the provide this business value.
Yeah.
Value being defined as actually how do you define value? We talk about creating value all the time in
Sure.
outbound. How do you define value?
And so I try to take like I take the approach of like what's a problem they might have and what's the
Mhm.
solution I would provide.
Yep.
And so like the solution I provide in that instance would be um like the value, right?
Yep, exactly. Yep.
The
Yep,
value.
got it.
And so kind of like how do I come up with the problem that I think they might have is like understanding the account, right? And
Yes,
like
exactly.
I mentioned things like for Brax, like we love global companies because we have a very global product. So I'm looking like where does this company have offices? Where does this company have employees, right? So that's one piece. Another piece is like I mentioned, like a tech stack is huge for me because I can speak to like integrations Brex has that I know other companies don't.
Yep.
And so right there, like I'm coming up with problems that they might be experiencing. And then when I actually speak to them, I know what value to like pitch to them.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So it's about understanding the account, understanding the gaps or the issues they might have, and coming with a strong what I call POV point of
Yeah,
view that's based on that account.
exactly.
Yeah, that's so key that I think again a lot of people don't understand. So
I agree. I agree.
good. Yeah, I really like that, and just that you approach it systematically. And then obviously you go through your cold calls and your emails, and it's obviously cold call heavy, and then you book the meeting, so on and so forth. So let's transition finally to more your SDR community. I want to talk about this GOAT SDR. What
Sure.
is it? What inspired you to make it? Let's talk about it.
So like being totally honest, I'm still like building it out. We have like a
Great.
Slack channel right now with about a 20 different SDRs and it's really just constant conversation around like what's working, what's not working,
Hmm.
and kind of like how we're operating today. just trying to share best practices. And honestly, like to me, the SDR role has been everything and more. I've learned a lot in these about almost 2 years, um, kind of about myself, but about sales. And so I believe like mentorship is so important. And I've learned like so much, like I mentioned, these last 2 years almost, that like I kind of want to share what I've learned, small wins, small losses, and like how we can all improve. And so that's kind of like what I'm really trying to build out.
Yeah, it sounds like a forum. I use the word forum. It sounds like a good group for people to who are in actual practice to go and share what's working, what's not, and to support each other. That's
Yeah,
absolutely
that's
awesome.
exactly what it is.
And what caused you to wanna make a group like that? 'Cause I know you got a million things going on being in a BDR. It was a lot. It was a lot to the role people I think don't
Right.
appreciate. So what made you want to build that out in your spare time?
Yeah, like I mentioned, like mentorship is huge piece, right? And like I have great mentors today, but like I don't have great mentees, like I'd say, you get me?
Mhm.
And I think I have a lot of experience that like I want to share in that.
Love that.
So to shorten like the learning curve for others, right?
Yeah.
And I think you can always also like teach up, right? So people with less experience might be able to teach me multiple things, right? So like
Mhm.
building a community for that, um, or I built the community for that reason. Additionally, like I mentioned, I think communities are just like a huge part
Yeah.
of kind of like personal growth and long-term like yeah, long-term professional growth. And so I see communities um like Pavilion, right? Or even like Holistic Sales Co that we're both part of, right? And how that really can grow into a business model. And so like I hope one day to be a CEO, and so I hope SD Go DR is like a small piece of like how I'm learning to like maybe build up a community.
I love it. No, I love that you're taking action and putting what you want to do into practice because that's really I admire you for that. A lot of people would just think about it. Yeah, plug for Goat SDR
So
community.
I
With that being
appreciate it.
said, before I ask a final question, where can people learn more about you and find you?
You can just find me on LinkedIn, Sam Lopez. Yeah, that's pretty much
With a
where
little cloud next to his name. With a little
a
cloud
little
next to
cloud,
his
yeah.
name. Okay, final question. If someone could not listen to this entire episode, they can only listen to what you're going to say next. And let's say they're an SDR, BDR, and they want to be successful in the role. And maybe they're unemployed, maybe they're employed, but they
Sure.
want to be successful. What piece of advice would you have for them?
Just take action. And I say that with like very little thinking because I think that's the most important thing anybody can do is like if you want to be successful at being an SDR, take action, like make those calls, be curious, ask those questions. If you want to find a job, like apply apply to those jobs, like reach out to those recruiters, reach out to people in your network, out of your network in those jobs today. But it really just starts with like taking action and I would say less planning.
Less planning, taking action.
Yeah.
Dude, that's very solid. I respect that. You can take action by hitting the follow or subscribe button and sharing this with a friend if it was actually valuable. If it wasn't, also hit me up. Let me know how we can improve. But thank you all for listening and watching, and we'll talk to you.